Guten Tag und willkommen. This is Tom Roth and David Paisley here to speak to you about LGBTQ travel in 2021 from a research perspective. We'd like to thank ITB, our longtime partner, for the opportunity to share some of our most recent research with you. We will speak slowly, and I know that this will be translated, so hopefully everyone will get as much out of the presentation as possible. We really appreciate our long-term partnership with ITB, and especially during this very challenging time. Next slide, please, Dave. So I'm Thomas Roth. I'm the president and founder of Community Marketing and Insights, and David Paisley is with me. He's our senior research director, and we've been producing LGBTQ tourism research since 1992. So we're in our 29th year. Next slide, Dave. I'm going to share with you a little bit about Community Marketing and Insights for the few of you who may not know us yet. We are San Francisco based, but we have clients all around the world. As I mentioned, we started back in 1992. We are 100% LGBTQ owned and operated, and we're an NGLCC, the National LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce certified supplier. So we've been doing this for 28 years. We've conducted hundreds of studies. About a third of our studies have been in tourism and hospitality, and we work with many other industries as well. Our research is based on a panel, which is a database of over 50,000 LGBTQ consumers across North America. And just like every full service research firm, we produce surveys, focus groups, interviews and intercepts and other methodologies, but we are entirely LGBTQ focused. And we serve a variety of types of clients too, corporations, of course, universities, NGO, nonprofit organizations, and government institutions across the United States and around the world. This slide is just a few of our clients. You may recognize some of the brands there that are international, like Marriott and Target and Google, but we've worked with really quite a wide variety of clients over the years. And next slide, Dave. We want to start off the presentation by telling you a little bit about some resources you have available to follow up. The presentation that we're going to be sharing with you is based on our research, in particular 4 studies that are available for no charge at our website. They can just be downloaded. One of the studies we'll be covering is the LGBT Tourism and Hospitality Survey that we've been doing annually for 24 years. We did 2 updates last year, a COVID-19 study in May and then a follow-up study in October. And we'll also be discussing a little bit from our community survey, which is a bit more broad than just tourism. And new on our website is a Black LGBTQ community survey focusing on the African American community, because diversity is a very, very important topic within LGBTQ marketing and communications. Next slide. I'm going to start off with a few slides just as a quick orientation. I recognize that many of the attendees here are longtime veterans in the LGBTQ market, but a few of you may be brand new. And I know some of the other presentations are going to be going in depth on other elements of the tourism market. But we have a few slides that are research-based that I thought might be a good way to start the communication. And then Dave will take over and talk to you about some of our most recent studies. Next. First of all, and I think primarily of importance, and for everyone to take home after today's session, is that there is no LGBTQ travel market. And that might sound strange because, of course, we're talking about LGBTQ travel. But we really can't understand the LGBTQ community or the LGBTQ traveler market segment if we don't understand the diversity within this community. We really represent the entire diversity of the world's population. We are every race, every religion, every interest, every background. It just happens that we are a sexual minority, and we've become, therefore, a special interest market because we have particular goals and priorities that we share. So just to call out a few of these, a same-sex couple that lives in a big city with no kids and has corporate jobs is a very different market, obviously, than an older lesbian couple who's retired and lives in a resort town. A bisexual man in an opposite relationship in Mexico is very different as a market than a bisexual woman married to a trans man in Seattle. So I think you get the idea. We are a full spectrum of communities within a community. And you need to understand that because different segments of our community will provide different opportunities for your success in this marketplace. Next slide. When we do our studies, we don't ask, are you male or female? We don't ask, are you gay or straight? These kinds of binary approaches to who we are doesn't work within our community. It's very important, again, to understand the vast diversity within the LGBTQ community, from a gender identity, from a sexual orientation, and other approaches that make us who we are. So when we do our surveys, we actually ask people to identify from any of these or all of them that make sense to them. And you'll see at the bottom of each list, other, please tell us, because we're always learning. Every year this list changes. And that's, I think, what makes the community really interesting and also can be very challenging. But we have to keep up with the terminology and what makes this community so unique. Next slide. Another really important point to mention here, and I think maybe to dispel an urban myth. Often when marketers look at the LGBTQ community, they think of us as gay men living in a big city, right? And obviously in Berlin, there are a lot of gay men living in Berlin, and Berlin is a great city to live in. But the reality is our community lives across all demographics. And about a third of us do live in big cities. About a third live in the suburbs or a smaller city. And about a third live in more rural areas, small cities far outside of the urban core. Knowing this helps us with marketing, because marketing is communicating with our segment. And if you just marketed in the big cities, you would only really be reaching about a third of the community. So we felt that this was important to understand, to dispel a myth, but also to share with you opportunities to reach out. Of course, through the internet, it's so easy to connect with LGBTQ people who live in other communities around our country. And next slide, Dave. I wanted to ask Dave to share some of the differences the LGBTQ community may be than non-LGBTQ people.
Great, and thank you, Tom. And getting back to the last slide, again, my name is David Paisley. I'm the Senior Research Director, and I'm coming from Joshua Tree, California. I'm one of the third that lives in rural America now. Moved to my vacation home in Joshua Tree, which started as a vacation home and now is my permanent home. So I'm no longer a big city gay, right? But we want to talk a little bit about some of the demographic differences. And then first of all, the LGBT community is more likely to be single and not living with a partner. I mean, that's especially true with gay men, much less so for lesbians. So in our community, the women's community is far more likely to be in a relationship than the men's community. And that's important because the way single people travel is very different than the way how couples travel. And I think that played out a lot with COVID, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. First of all, our community trends younger. So when you look at a lot of the research out there is that, especially with Gen Z and millennials, a much larger part of the community is identifying as part of the LGBTQ community. And that's important to understand, is that the community does trend younger. Also, we're less likely to be parents. So that affects our ability to travel, often to the positive. Now, that's not to say there are not LGBTQ parents. There are more and more gay and lesbian parents out there every day. But the reality is, at least compared to the general population, we are less likely to be parents, and that does influence our travel decisions. And we also are a community that is very mobile. One of the sort of demographics here we have in the United States that is a determination if you own your home or not is that you live within 50 miles of mom. I think that's a really interesting demographic, but when you look at it from the LGBT versus non-LGBT standpoint, we are far more likely not to live within 50 miles of mom. And I think that makes us a much more mobile community, and that really enables us to travel and gives us that sort of worldview of travel much higher than the general population. And also, we tend to be better educated. So that's a really interesting concept, is that when you look at LGBT community statistics, I think a lot of us, when we left our homes, we realized that education was really needed in order to expand our horizons as LGBT people. And a lot of the research does show that we are more likely to have a bachelor's degree or higher. And then also to say that evaluating LGBT household income is complex. I think one of the myths about the LGBT community is that we make more money than the general population. Our research has never really shown that. Our research mostly shows that we make about the same income as the general population. But I also think that LGBT income is complicated for a couple of reasons. And that's because, say, household income, gay men are more likely to be single income, while the lesbian community is more likely to be dual income. I mean, that's a great example of how things get a little bit skewed in a different way with the LGBTQ community. So we just like to throw out some of these demographic differences compared to the general population, because I think they're really important to understand. And now I want to talk a little bit more about how COVID-19 has changed LGBTQ travel. As Tom mentioned, we've done actually 2 studies on LGBTQ travel and COVID-19 in 2020, one in the spring and one in the fall. And I want to talk about some of the results. All right, first of all, we asked, has COVID-19 pandemic had a financial impact on you to date? And I think one thing that people often talk about is the devastating financial impact of COVID-19 across populations, and that's true. But one thing I do want you to understand is it's not true for everyone, and I would say it's not necessarily true for the majority of the population. At least here in the US, the vast majority of people have jobs. Actually, overall incomes in the United States rose last year. So there's a lot of money out there. But on the other hand, what's happened, at least here in the United States, is that we've actually increased our savings. And it's been really interesting when you look at some of the financial statistics, is that the savings rate in the United States really grew in 2020. And that means that we have a little bit of pent up income that we're going to use at some point, and hopefully travel will be one of those places. Also understand that although we do have a higher unemployment, that's still, at least in the United States, like the 8 to 10% range. So that does mean, again, the vast majority of people do still have jobs and have income to travel. The desire to travel, again, is very strong. So this was back in October, so it's a few months old, but at that time, 75% of all the LGBT participants indicated extreme or moderate desire to travel again. So I think that's great. There's a lot of pent-up desire to travel in the LGBTQ community. And we're seeing it increasing over time. So between the May and October study, that increased 6%. And I imagine that percentage would even be higher today. And also want to say that the increases we're seeing across all demographics, all genders, all generations. So there's a real desire to travel again in the community. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about what happened, at least here in the United States, as far as LGBTQ travel in the summer of 2020. I think the important thing here is that it really here in the US became mostly about car vacations. So of all the participants, only 12% indicated taking at least one trip by airplane for the period of May 1st to October 30th, but 40% took at least one vacation by car. So that's a big, big difference. And I think it's something to really understand, but that has winners and losers. And what definitely happened in the United States with LGBTQ travel is that the big losers were big cities. There was a lot less travel to big cities, and then international trips. There's relatively little travel internationally here in the United States. But what it did mean is that people did definitely drive to, I'm gonna call, smaller communities and resort communities who did really, really well. Like where I live, which is the Palm Springs Joshua Tree area, our summer is actually pretty good as far as tourism goes. But some of the big cities like New York or San Francisco, and I'm sure some of the big cities in Europe were pretty hard hit. So that probably is similar to the general population, but it definitely happened in the LGBTQ community also. Car versus airplane travel. So as I said before, people were more likely, they said, during the next 6 months to travel by car and not planes. But I think a couple things to point out here is that for those people willing to fly for vacation, the distance in air didn't seem to matter a whole lot. So flying for 2 hours or less or 2 hours or more, that was about the same percentage point, right? So I think for driving, what we were definitely seeing is a lot more drive vacations in the United States. And I think we'll probably continue to see that, unfortunately, through the summer. I don't think this is going away anytime in the near future, but hopefully by fall or maybe next winter, we'll start to see more international and more flight vacations. The other thing to say about this demographically, though, is that gay and bisexual men were more likely to indicate a desire to travel by plane. So that's an interesting statistic, which I think, again, is interesting. Here about car vacations, one thing that we've worked with our clients a little bit about is to expand your preconceived notions of what is an acceptable driving distance to your destination. So for a lot of our destinations that we work with, they would often look at their drive sort of market to be 2 or 3 hours away. But what happened this summer is that people were willing to drive a lot farther to go on vacation than they used to. So 64% were willing to drive 5 hours or more to go on a vacation. So that's a big change. When we did other statistics in the past, people generally were not willing to drive 5, 6, 7, 8 hours to go to vacation, but they were this past summer, and they did this past summer. So that created opportunities for a lot of our destinations to expand their sort of circle of potential customers as far as the drive distance to their homes. A little bit about travel safety. Now, these are similar questions. And the first question on your left is, what is the most important thing that an airline can do to make you feel safe? And on the right, what is the most important thing that a hotel can do to make you feel safe? And I think what's interesting about this particular chart is that a lot of it has to do with enforcement. And that makes sense to me. At least here in the United States, we have a real problem with certain parts of our community not taking COVID very seriously. And as a side note, that part of the community that doesn't take COVID very seriously also tends to be the group of people that have not been very LGBTQ friendly over time. So I think one thing that's really interesting is that one of the major things that we really want airlines and hotels to do is to, in fact, enforce your policies. And that was a problem here in the United States, is that many hotels and airlines had these policies, but they weren't really enforcing them. And it made many LGBTQ people feel uncomfortable. So, I mean, of course, disinfecting and like if in airlines, they like to leave the middle seat unsold. All that stuff's really important. But I think the most important thing here to know is that you need to set out a policy for travel and then actually follow your policy, follow up on what you're going to say that you're going to do. Types of hotels, I think this is another interesting thing, is that we asked if you're planning a vacation and which type of accommodations are you likely to book. And here, which has been a big change, is that sort of the rise of the small hotel and the rise of Airbnb. And honestly, some of the bigger hotels really came down in their sort of desirability. And that's a little bit sad to me. And I do get that. I think a lot of the large hotels are really hurting because of the lack of group business, the lack of convention business. But one thing that's really expanded is a lot of the small hotels and motels and Airbnbs and house rentals have really done really quite well this summer because of this change in perception about what is safe and where people want to travel to. So again, a lot of these trends may be similar to the general population, but they definitely happen in the LGBT community also. This next question is about what do you want to do when you're actually visiting a destination. And not surprising here this summer is all about what we call the couple experience or the outdoor experience. So the things that were most popular were like hiking on outdoor trails or visiting urban parks and gardens or walking urban streets and neighborhoods or visiting a beach. And the things that really fell were things like casinos and concerts and going to bars and nightclubs. But I think one aspect of this slide that's important to point out is how we've generally marketed to the LGBT community over time. And I would suggest to you that we've marketed LGBTQ as a group experience. And what I mean by that is even if you're traveling individually, you're traveling individually to maybe a big city to have the group LGBTQ community experience, go to bars and neighborhoods and go to parties and go to Pride and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting that has been the primary message that we've given to the LGBT community, but that wasn't the message that was really going to be heard during COVID in 2020. It was all about the individual experience, the couple experience. And to some degree, I think it put us at a disadvantage within the LGBT community that we had this historical message of the group experience that just would not work in 2020. And many of our destinations struggled to change that message, to change it to we're a couple destination, that you and a couple friends can come to our destination and have these individual experiences or small experiences. And changing that message can be really important, and even into the future. So that's it, a little bit about the COVID-19 research. What I was stressing, that's just a sample of it. As Tom said earlier, that there's a lot of great research on our website that's downloadable for free. Please do so, and I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Yeah, as Dave mentioned, this is really just scraping the surface. We could literally talk for hours about even the recent research studies that we've done, but the time is limited, and we acknowledge that. So now it's time for follow-up. So please do connect with us. Let us know if you have some questions or if you'd like any of these reports that we referenced. We're more than happy to help and support your journey through the LGBTQ marketplace. And final slide, Dave. Community Marketing Insights has worked with a wide variety of tourism organizations, hotels, airlines, and other travel suppliers over the years. And we can really help you refine what your approach is or should be in the LGBTQ marketplace through research. Travel and tourism from the United States and Canada will be on the rebound. And now is the time to start planning for your outreach to these communities. So we're happy to help you in any way that we can. Thank you very much for sharing this time with us.
Thank you.
It's a brief introduction to the research, but you're welcome to dig much deeper into it on your own and follow up with questions. So thanks very much, ITB. Enjoy the NOW convention, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year. Take care.
Thank you.